So we're starting to piece together what exactly took place with regard to this drone incident over the Kremlin. The first drone, there was two of them, hit the top of the Kremlin's dome of the Senate Palace at 2:27 a.m. We can see this because the clock tower is in the frame. Hits the dome, lights on fire. 15 minutes later, we have the second drone come into frame and explode over the top of the dome. So we've established the timeline somewhat here between the two, 15 minutes. This is footage from closed-circuit television, CCTV, that films the facade of the Kremlin and caught the first explosion. You can see hits and lights on fire. There'll be a closer-up version. Interestingly, this drone from OSINT Gathering enters the frame from left to right. It comes in from this direction and impacts the dome, lights on fire. As you can see, it's not a very big explosion. It's certainly not big enough to cause any kind of massive damage, any kind of mayhem to the dome of the Senate Palace. It's not a drone that's going to injure people inside the building. I mean, it's quite a small fire that the explosion causes. And that was really confirmed because here is the aftermath of the burning. I mean, again, not very much damage. It's just scorched tiles, a little bit of penetration somewhat from the impact, but not what you would call devastating damage to the dome itself. So this brings us to the second drone, the one that flies in, that we see actually fly in and explode over the dome. And this also explains why there was two people. 15 minutes later is when this drone enters the Kremlin's airspace and hits the dome, or it doesn't hit the dome, it blows up over the dome. So these two people can be explained as potentially going up to investigate the damage caused by the previous drone. So the damage is up in this vicinity. They were walking up to inspect. I don't know if they're security personnel, firefighters, who knows. But it does explain why there was two people on the dome. You can see when I play this, the drone comes in from the top left up here and explodes over the top of the dome. Again, not a big explosion, not big enough, even remotely close to big enough to cause any kind of damage. It doesn't look like a explosively formed projectile. It just looks like a small bomb blows up over the top of the Kremlin. Looking at the size of the drone relative to the size of the people, when it gets closer to there, you can see it's probably a medium-sized drone of like 4 feet roughly. It's not the same size as a big enough drone to cause massive damage. So this is clearly a symbolic attack. It's not an attempt on anyone's life. Putin wasn't there. The problem is, who would benefit? The interesting thing here is one drone comes in from one direction and the second drone comes in from a completely opposite direction. They didn't come from the same direction. So not entirely sure what that means either, but based on the footage, it's highly likely that two drones penetrated the Moscow air defense and exploded over the Senate Palace and the Kremlin. This should be the most defended airspace in the world. I mean, I don't know why these two drones were able to penetrate into the Kremlin's airspace, especially the second drone, when everyone should have been on alert. Either their air defenses don't work, or they really aren't activated, they're complacent, they didn't really think any kind of strike was going to take place. I don't know. I mean, was this a strike to cause humiliation of Putin? Was it, who's the benefactor? Was it Ukraine showing that they can get close to the Kremlin and cause damage? Was it some sort of internal struggle? Some theories have floated. Wagner Group boss Yevgeny Prigozhin might do something like this to signify his displeasure with the Kremlin. I don't know about that because that's essentially a death sentence for him if he's caught up in that. But also, he could be trying to instigate a false flag from his own perspective to cause an escalation. I don't know. There are plenty of internal groups in Russia that don't like Putin. This frankly doesn't look military grade when you watch it. It looks like just an explosion of fireball, almost like a movie explosion. If you ever watch an actual grenade or something like that, there's not a big flaming fireball generally, and even explosively formed projectiles don't cause big flaming fireballs. They are very quick flashes that cause massive amounts of damage. This wasn't that. This was almost a symbolic humiliation strike, and I still don't know if Ukraine carried it out. I don't know if it's internal. I don't know if it's a Kremlin false flag. I don't know why any of those would take place, because a Kremlin false flag paints the Kremlin as potentially inept. They can't protect their own capital, then how can they protect the Russian people? The Russian people will see that as weakness. Ukraine has stated multiple times it wasn't them, and it makes sense that they wouldn't do it. This is an escalation that would cause Russia to have potentially devastating escalatory reactions to this. You could see a galvanization of the populace to bring together more volunteers and deploying of the actual military to fully declare war on Ukraine, even up to and including potentially arming nuclear-tipped missiles and threatening or even carrying out a nuclear strike in a tactical sense on Ukraine. So Ukraine knows the potential outcome. This doesn't do anything for Ukraine. No one was hurt. No one was killed. I don't think they're in the business of trying to do humiliating optical strikes on the Kremlin. They have a real war they're fighting on the front lines, and they wouldn't be wasting weaponry on that. So again, I don't know. It just seems like either side has valid excuses for why they would or would not do this, and no one knows right now. So we'll see what happens going forward, but at least we can somewhat explain why the two people were on the building. You would like to think that Russia wouldn't conduct a false flag while their own people are going to inspect, but they have a complete lack of care, and potentially those two would have been casualties they could have thrown out as martyrs. I don't know. All I know is none of it makes sense for either side as to why this happened. Interestingly, the internet seems to think that there are partisans within Russia that could be the more likely benefactors of carrying something like this out, if humiliating Putin, making him look weak. Therefore, they can continue their campaign to try and unseat him or depose him. Again, not sure. It's all very confusing, but that was the timeline of events.